Princess Zaranth of the Caltharian Empire stood frozen at the entrance of her father's throne room, her crystalline blue skin shimmering with nervous energy. The massive doors, carved from living starwood and embedded with precious metals from a dozen conquered worlds, had just sealed behind her with a resonating thud that seemed to echo through her very bones. She had been summoned urgently from her studies in the Royal Academy. The message had been brief, but alarming. Your presence is required immediately in the throne room. The fate of our empire may depend on what transpires in the next hour. Her father, Emperor Maltos, was not given to dramatic statements without cause. The throne room stretched before her like a cathedral of power. Soaring pillars of black marble reached toward a vaulted ceiling painted with the history of Caltharian conquests. Holographic displays showed the current extent of their empire spanning 3 galactic arms, with over 2,000 subjugated species paying tribute to the Caltharian crown. It was a reminder of their absolute dominance over this sector of space. But today, something was different. At the center of the vast hall, her father sat upon the throne of stars, a massive seat crafted from the compressed cores of dead planets. His imposing figure, nearly 9 feet tall with the characteristic ridged skull and powerful build of their species, seemed diminished somehow. Around him stood his most trusted advisors, General Vextar, the grizzled veteran of 100 campaigns, High Diplomat Silnara, whose silver tongue had negotiated the surrender of entire star systems, and Chief Intelligence Officer Karmoth, whose network of spies reached into every corner of known space. Their faces bore expressions she had never seen before. Fear, uncertainty. Even her father's usually commanding presence seemed strained, his golden eyes darting between his advisors and the small figure standing before the throne. The human. Zaranth had heard whispers about humans in the Academy. They were a recently discovered species from a backwater planet called Earth, notable only for their surprising resilience and stubborn refusal to submit to superior civilizations. Most galactic powers considered them a minor curiosity, too primitive to pose any real threat. The Caltharian Empire had planned to add them to their collection of tributary species as an afterthought, once more pressing matters were resolved. This human, however, defied every expectation she had formed. The being stood barely 6 feet tall, minuscule compared to the towering Caltharians surrounding him. His skin was a warm brown color, darker than the pale blues and greens common among civilized species. Short black hair crowned his head, and his face bore the weathered marks of someone who had seen extensive combat. He wore simple dark clothing with armored panels that looked almost primitive compared to Caltharian battlesuits. Yet despite his small stature and crude equipment, there was something about him that made the hair on Zarantha's arms stand on end. He stood with perfect stillness, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on her father with an intensity that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. There was no deference in his posture, no acknowledgement of the overwhelming display of power surrounding him. "Ah, Princess," her father's voice boomed across the hall, though she detected a slight tremor in it. "Allow me to introduce Colonel Marcus Chun of the Terran Defense Force." The human's gaze shifted to her, and Zaranth felt her breath catch. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and in them she saw something that chilled her to the core. Not anger, not hatred, but a cold, calculating intelligence combined with absolute conviction. This was someone who had looked death in the face countless times and never blinked. "Colonel Chun has come to deliver a message," the Emperor continued, his words carefully measured. "The humans have declined our generous offer of incorporation into the Empire." General Vextar stepped forward, his scarred face twisted with disgust. "This primitive refuses to bow before the might of the Caltharian Empire. He stands there as if he were our equal." The human's expression didn't change, but when he spoke, his voice carried across the vast hall with surprising clarity. "I stand here as the representative of free humanity. We have examined your generous offer and found it lacking." "Lacking?" High Diplomat Silnara's voice rose in pitch. "We offer your species protection, prosperity, and a place in the greatest empire this galaxy has ever known. You offer slavery with better food, the human replied calmly. We've seen what happens to species that accept your protection. Their children grow up speaking Caltharian instead of their native tongues. Their cultures become footnotes in your museums. Their warriors become your cannon fodder. Zara-Anth watched in fascination as her father's advisors bristled at the human's words. She had never seen anyone speak so boldly in the presence of the emperor. Even allied species showed proper deference when addressing the throne. This human spoke as if he were negotiating between equals. "You forget yourself," her father said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had cowed entire worlds. "The Caltharian Empire spans 3 galactic arms. We command fleets that could turn your entire solar system to ash. What makes you think your primitive species can stand against us?" For the first time since entering the throne room, the human smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Because, Your Imperial Majesty," he said, "you've never fought humans before." The silence that followed the human's words stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Zara-Anth could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she watched her father's golden eyes narrow dangerously. No one spoke to the Emperor of the Caltharian Empire with such casual defiance, and lived to tell about it. "You have remarkable courage for such a small creature," Emperor Maltose said slowly, each word dripping with menace. "Or perhaps it is simply ignorance. Tell me, Colonel Chun, what do you know of the Rogothian Confederacy?" The human's expression remained unchanged. Former mining consortium. Controlled 12 star systems in the outer spiral. Population of roughly 40 billion. They fell to your empire 7 years ago after a 3-month siege. Indeed. And the Silthek Republic. Agricultural worlds. 22 systems. 80 billion souls. They surrendered after your fleets destroyed their orbital habitats. The human's voice carried no emotion as he recited these facts like a student answering exam questions. General Vextar stepped closer, his massive frame looming over the human. "Those were civilizations far more advanced than yours, with fleets numbering in the thousands and planetary defenses that had stood for centuries. What makes you think your backward planet can accomplish what they could not?" Colonel Chun turned to face the general directly. Zara-Anth noticed he didn't crane his neck to look up, didn't show any sign of intimidation despite the general's imposing presence. Instead, he regarded the Caltharian warrior with the same calm assessment she might give to an interesting specimen in the Academy's biology labs. "General, may I ask you a question?" Vextar's scarred face twisted in surprise. "You dare. When was the last time you personally led troops in ground combat?" The human interrupted. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zara-Anth saw something flicker across the general's features. "Uncertainty?" After a long moment, he replied, "The siege of Corvathia Prime, 3 years ago." "And how long did that siege last?" 18 days, Vextar said proudly. "The defenders thought their mountain fortresses would protect them. We proved them wrong." The human nodded thoughtfully. 18 days against an established civilization with prepared defenses. Not bad. On Earth, General, we call that a warm-up. Chief Intelligence Officer Karmoth, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "Your bravado is amusing, human, but we have studied your species extensively. Your technology is primitive, your military fragmented into competing nations, your weapons barely capable of reaching beyond your own atmosphere. Our intelligence networks have monitored your global communications for months." For the first time, the human's composure cracked slightly, and Zara-Anth caught a glimpse of something that made her scales prickle with unease. It wasn't fear or concern. It was amusement. "Your intelligence networks," Colonel Chun said slowly, "have been feeding you exactly what we wanted you to see." The words hit the throne room like a physical blow. Karmoth's normally composed demeanor shattered, his pale features darkening with anger. "Impossible. Our surveillance systems are undetectable by your technology." "Undetectable by our publicly known technology," the human corrected. "Tell me, Officer Karmoth, What did your intelligence reports say about human military doctrine? Karmoth hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with being questioned by someone he considered a primitive. Finally, he answered, conventional warfare, nuclear deterrence, largely defensive strategies focused on protecting population centers and industrial capacity. Fascinating. And what did those reports say about human psychology? Our response to threats. Your species shows typical her behavior. When faced with superior force, you seek negotiation and compromise. Historical precedent shows humans consistently choose survival over principles when presented with overwhelming opposition. The human smile returned, wider this time, and infinitely more unsettling. Officer Karmoth, your intelligence networks have been studying us for months, you say. Tell me, in all that time, did they ever wonder why a supposedly primitive species would send a single representative to the heart of the greatest empire in the galaxy? Why we would risk the life of a military officer on what appears to be a suicide mission? A chill ran down Zarantha's spine as she realized the implications of the human's words. She looked around the throne room with new eyes, noting the positioning of the guards, the locations of the weapon scanners, the communication arrays that connected this room to the rest of the Imperial command structure. Her father seemed to reach the same conclusion. Are you saying you came here to die, Colonel? Not at all, Your Majesty. I came here to deliver a message. The message is simple. Humanity does not yield. We do not bow. We do not surrender. Ever. Brave words, General Vextar snarled. But words will not stop our battle fleets when they arrive at your world. No, the human agreed. They won't. But perhaps you should ask yourself why I'm standing here telling you this instead of my superiors trying to negotiate some kind of peaceful settlement. The question sent a ripple of unease through the assembled advisors. Zaranth watched her father's face as understanding began to dawn. Because, Colonel Chun continued, this is not a diplomatic mission. This is a formal declaration of war. The human reached slowly into his jacket, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He withdrew a small device that looked like nothing more than a simple communication unit. My superiors asked me to deliver this message in person because they wanted to look into the eyes of the Empire that thought it could simply add us to its collection. They wanted to see if you were worth the trouble of fighting properly, or if you were just another group of bullies who relied on intimidation and overwhelming force. He activated the device. A holographic display appeared, showing star maps that made Zariantha's blood run cold. Earth's solar system was highlighted in blue, but surrounding it in all directions were formations of ships, thousands upon thousands of them, in formations and configurations that her Academy instructors had never covered in their studies of galactic warfare. The Terran Defense Force would like to formally inform the Keltharian Empire that as of this moment, we consider ourselves at war. Our fleets are in position. Our allies have been contacted. Your expansion into human space ends here. Emperor Maltos stared at the display, his mind clearly racing through the implications. This is madness. You cannot possibly match our military might. You're absolutely right, the human said cheerfully. We can't match your military might. That's why we're not going to try. He touched another control, and the display changed, showing shipping routes, supply lines, communication relays, and industrial facilities throughout the Keltharian Empire. Red indicators began appearing across the map like a spreading disease. Instead, Colonel Chun said, we're going to do what humans do best. We're going to make this war so costly, so devastating, and so thoroughly unpleasant for you that you'll wish you had never heard of our species. The display zoomed in on various locations, showing what appeared to be sabotage operations already in progress. Space stations going dark. Supply convoys simply vanishing. Communication arrays broadcasting scrambled signals. Ow! Chief Intelligence Officer Karmoth whispered, staring at the destruction of his carefully maintained information networks. Your empire is vast, the human explained patiently. But that's also its weakness. You rely on millions of non-Keltharian species to maintain your infrastructure, to crew your ships, to work in your factories. Over the past several months, we've been in contact with quite a few of them. Zara felt the blood drain from her face as the full scope of the human strategy became clear. They weren't planning to fight the Keltharian Empire. They were planning to tear it apart from inside. "Gentlemen, Your Majesty," Colonel Chun said, deactivating the display and returning the device to his jacket. "Welcome to a human war." The throne room erupted into chaos as the full implications of the human's words sank in. General Vextar roared commands at his guards while Chief Intelligence Officer Karmoth frantically worked his personal communication device, trying to re-establish contact with his spy networks. High Diplomat Silnara stood frozen, her usually eloquent tongue failing her as she stared at the holographic evidence of the Empire's vulnerability. But it was her father's reaction that truly frightened Zarianth. The Emperor of the Keltharian Empire, the conqueror of worlds, the absolute ruler of 3 galactic arms, sat motionless on his throne. His golden eyes were fixed on the human with an expression she had never seen before. For the first time in her life, Princess Zarianth was witnessing her father experiencing genuine fear. "This is impossible," General Vextar growled, returning from his hurried consultation with the guard commander. "Our security is absolute. No unauthorized personnel have been allowed within a dozen light years of any critical installation." Colonel Chun tilted his head slightly, like a teacher patiently correcting a slow student. "General, what percentage of your empire's workforce consists of non-Keltharian species?" The question caught Vextar off guard. "What does that matter? They are all properly vetted, their loyalty assured through standard protocols." "Standard protocols?" the human mused. Would that be the implanted loyalty chips, the family hostages, or the simple threat of orbital bombardment if they misbehave? All conquered species receive the benefits of Keltharian protection in exchange for their service. High Diplomat Silnara finally found her voice. "It is a mutually beneficial arrangement." The human's laugh was short and bitter. "Mutually beneficial? You really believe that, don't you?" He gestured toward the holographic display, still showing the Empire's crumbling infrastructure. "Tell me, Diplomat, what happens when those grateful species suddenly receive a better offer?" Zarianth watched her father lean forward on his throne. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that for the past year, human diplomatic teams have been making contact with every subjugated species in your empire. We've offered them something your civilization never has. Freedom. Real freedom. Not the gilded cage you call protection." The words hit the assembled Keltharians like physical blows. Emperor Malthos's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You would destabilize the entire galactic order." "We would restore it," Colonel Chin corrected. "Your empire exists because you convinced the galaxy that resistance was futile. You made everyone believe that cooperation was preferable to the alternative. But you made one crucial mistake. Which was, you never fought a species that considers death preferable to slavery." Chief Intelligence Officer Karmoth looked up from his communication device, his face pale with shock. "Sir, I'm receiving reports from 17 sectors. Communication blackouts, industrial sabotage, cargo ships broadcasting distress signals before going silent. 18 sectors now," another aide whispered, approaching with a data pad. "The Vorthack Mining Consortium has declared independence and is requesting human protection. The Zilnari Technical Academy has shut down all weapons research facilities. And, sir," his voice faltered, "the Neridian shipyards have just transmitted their surrender to human forces." The throne room fell silent, except for the soft humming of environmental systems. Zarianth could see her father's mind racing, calculating the implications of losing access to the galaxy's largest shipbuilding facility. Without the Neridian yards, the Keltharian fleet could not be maintained, let alone expanded. "How many?" Emperor Malthos asked quietly. Colonel Chun consulted his communication device. "As of right now, 47 species have declared independence from your empire. 12 more are in active rebellion. The remainder are reconsidering their options." In one day, General Vextar's voice cracked with disbelief. "Oh, This wasn't accomplished in a day, General. This has been a 3-year operation. Human diplomatic teams, human special forces, human intelligence operatives, all working to build networks throughout your territory. We just activated them all simultaneously. Zaranth found herself studying the human with new eyes. There was something profoundly unsettling about his casual demeanor as he described the systematic destruction of the greatest empire in galactic history. He spoke of it like an engineering project, a complex problem that required innovative solutions. But why? She found herself asking, speaking for the first time since entering the throne room. All eyes turned to her, and she felt heat rise in her crystalline features. Why go to such lengths? You could have negotiated. There are always alternatives to war. Colonel Chun regarded her with what might have been sympathy. Princess, may I ask you a question? She glanced at her father, who nodded curtly. When your empire incorporates a new species, what happens to their children? The question seemed innocent enough. They receive education in Caltharian schools, learn our language and customs, are prepared for productive roles in imperial society. And their original language, their cultural traditions, their religious beliefs. Zaranth hesitated. She had never really considered these things important. Those are phased out, over time, to promote unity and efficiency. I see. And when these children grow up, do they remember being anything other than Caltharian? Of course not. Why would they need to? The human nodded sadly. Princess, in human terms, what your empire practices is called cultural genocide. You don't just conquer worlds, you erase them. You make it so that entire civilizations never existed except as footnotes in your museums. But they're better off, she protested. They have access to better technology, better medicine, better living conditions, at the cost of everything that made them who they were. Colonel Chen's voice carried a weight of sadness that surprised her. Princess, on Earth we have a saying, what profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? Your empire offers material prosperity in exchange for spiritual death. Emperor Maltose stood abruptly, his towering form radiating authority despite the chaos around him. Enough philosophy. Colonel Chun, you've made your point. What are your terms? Terms. The human seemed genuinely puzzled. For ending this madness. For calling off your rebellion. Name your price. Colonel Chun was quiet for a long moment, studying the Emperor with those dark, calculating eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried absolute finality. Your Majesty, I don't think you understand. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't a diplomatic crisis that can be resolved with the right concessions. This is a war. A war between two completely incompatible visions of how the galaxy should be ordered. He gestured toward the holographic display showing the collapsing empire. You built your civilization on the premise that might makes right, that the strong should rule the weak, that order and efficiency are worth any price. We reject that premise entirely. Then what do you want? We want you to leave. Pack up your fleets, gather your people, and withdraw to your original star system. Leave the rest of the galaxy alone. The suggestion was so audacious that for a moment no one in the throne room could process it. General Vextar was the first to recover. Impossible. The Empire cannot simply withdraw. Then, Colonel Chun said with terrifying calm, we'll make withdrawal your only option. The days following Colonel Chen's declaration blurred together in a nightmare of cascading disasters. Zaranth found herself spending most of her time in the Imperial Command Center, watching helplessly as the Caltharian Empire disintegrated before her eyes. The massive holographic display that dominated the center showed the Empire's territory in real time. What had once been a solid expanse of Caltharian blue was now riddled with red zones of rebellion, yellow areas of unrest, and growing patches of gray where communications have been completely severed. Each hour brought new reports of lost systems, defecting fleets, and infrastructure failures that seemed impossible to explain through conventional sabotage. Report. Her father commanded as Admiral Thexvor approached the command throne. The Admiral's usually pristine uniform was wrinkled and stained with exhaustion. The situation continues to deteriorate, Your Majesty. We've lost contact with the entire 7th Fleet. Their last transmission was from the Corvani system, where they were investigating reports of rebellion among the local mining colonies. Emperor Malthos's jaw tightened. An entire battle fleet doesn't simply vanish, Admiral. No, sir, it doesn't. Admiral HFY activated his personal display, showing scattered debris fields. Our long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures consistent with fleet-scale combat. But when our reconnaissance ships arrived, they found only wreckage. No enemy vessels, no signs of human technology, nothing to indicate what happened to our ships. General Vextar, who had aged visibly over the past week, leaned forward. The humans have been busy. 3 more shipyards have declared independence, and the Nexury Medical Consortium has announced they're providing humanitarian aid to liberated systems. Medical aid, Chief Intelligence Officer Karmoth spat. They're treating the wounded from our counterattacks and calling it humanitarian assistance. Zarinth studied the tactical displays with growing fascination and horror. The human strategy was unlike anything she had studied in her military history courses. They weren't attempting to match Keltharian strength with strength. Instead, they were systematically undermining the very foundations upon which the Empire rested. Princess, her father's voice broke through her analysis. You've been studying their tactics. What do you see? She hesitated, knowing her observations wouldn't be welcome. Father, they're not fighting a traditional war. They're fighting the concept of empire itself. Explain. Zarinth activated her own display, highlighting the pattern of rebellions and infrastructure failures. Look at the timing and location of each incident. They're not random. The humans are targeting the psychological pillars of our control. She pointed to a cluster of red zones. Here, they supported a rebellion on Vex Prime, just as our propaganda networks were broadcasting news of successful negotiations with the Tertian Republic. The message to other species was clear. Even our most loyal subjects can successfully resist. Her finger moved to another area. Here, they helped the Corvathian refugees establish an independent colony in previously uninhabited space. They're proving that life outside the Empire isn't just possible, it's preferable. Emperor Malthos studied the display with growing understanding. They're demonstrating that we're not invincible. More than that, Father, they're proving that we're not inevitable. For centuries, our expansion was based on the assumption that joining the Empire was the only path to prosperity and security. The humans are offering an alternative. Admiral HFY shook his head in frustration. But their fleets are tiny compared to ours. Even with all these rebellions, we still have numerical superiority in every engagement. Do we? Zarinth highlighted another section of the display. Admiral, when was the last time we fought a purely Keltharian battle? The question caught him off guard. After a moment of consideration, he replied, most of our crew members are recruited from member species. Exactly. Our ships are crewed by the same species that are now rebelling. Our factories are operated by workers whose home worlds have declared independence. Our supply lines run through systems that are actively working against us. The implications hit the command center like a physical blow. The Keltharian Empire had become so dependent on subjugated species that they could no longer function independently. Their very strength had become their weakness. Reports from the Outer Rim, another aide announced, approaching with a datapad. The human fleet has engaged Admiral Korthak's task force near the Silvani Nebula. Everyone in the command center turned to the main display as the tactical feed came online. What they saw challenged every assumption about human military capability. The human ships were indeed smaller than Keltharian vessels, but they moved with a fluid coordination that seemed almost organic. They fought not as individual vessels seeking glory, but as a single entity with a shared purpose. Their formations shifted and adapted in real time, presenting the Keltharian forces with tactical puzzles that had no conventional solutions. How are they coordinating their movements? General Vextar asked in amazement. There's no central command ship, No communication delays. They're responding to changes faster than our sensors can track them. But it wasn't just their coordination that was unsettling. It was their weapons. The humans weren't using the standard energy weapons common throughout the galaxy. Instead, they employed kinetic projectiles, explosive devices, and technological innovations that seemed designed specifically to counter Keltharian defensive systems. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Korthak." The Admiral's image appeared on the main screen, his usually composed demeanor shattered. Behind him, his flagship's bridge showed signs of severe damage. "Your Majesty, I must recommend immediate withdrawal. These humans, they fight like nothing I've ever encountered." "Explain, Admiral." "They don't seem to care about preservation of their vessels or crew. They've rammed 3 of my ships with their own, sacrificing themselves to achieve tactical objectives. They target our engines and life support systems instead of trying to destroy us outright. It's as if they want to disable us rather than kill us." Zara felt a chill run down her spine. "They're capturing our crews." "What? Father, think about it. If they destroy our ships, they eliminate potential threats, but gain nothing else. But if they disable our vessels and capture our crews, they gain intelligence, propaganda opportunities, and potential converts." As if to confirm her analysis, another transmission came through. This time it showed Keltharian officers, clearly prisoners but apparently unharmed, reading a statement to the camera. "We are crew members of the KIS Retribution, captured during the engagement at Silvani. We have been treated with respect and dignity by our human captives. We call upon the Empire to cease this destructive conflict and pursue peaceful negotiations." The statement was clearly coerced, but the fact that the crew members were alive and uninjured sent a powerful message throughout the Empire. The humans were showing mercy to their enemies, something the Keltharian military machine had never done. "Sir," Admiral Thexvor reported, "Admiral Korthak is requesting permission to retreat." Emperor Maltos stared at the tactical display for a long moment. His greatest admiral, commanding a fleet that had conquered star systems, was asking permission to run from a numerically inferior human force. "Permission granted," he said quietly. As the Keltharian fleet withdrew from the Silvani Nebula, leaving the humans in control of another strategic system, Zarinth realized that everything her people had believed about warfare, about empire, about their own superiority, was crumbling around them. The humans weren't just winning battles. They were winning the war by changing the very definition of victory. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a traitorous thought began to form. Perhaps the humans were right. 3 months had passed since Colonel Chen's declaration of war, and the throne room where it all began now felt like a mausoleum. The vast hall, once a symbol of absolute power, seemed hollow and empty despite the handful of advisors still loyal to the failing empire. Most of the holographic displays showing territorial control had been deactivated. The few that remained painted a picture too devastating to ignore. Princess Zaranth stood before her father's throne, no longer the naive student she had been at the war's beginning. The crystalline patterns in her skin had darkened with stress and sleepless nights spent in the command center, watching her civilization collapse system by system. "The Admiralty Council has reached a unanimous decision," she reported, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "Admiral Thexvor recommends immediate evacuation of all remaining frontier systems. We simply don't have the resources to maintain defensive positions." Emperor Maltos looked older than his 800 years, his once imposing frame seeming to have shrunk within the confines of the Throne of Stars. "How many systems do we control now?" 47, father. Down from over 2,000 at the war's beginning. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. General Vextar, his scarred face bearing fresh wounds from a recent engagement, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, it's not just the territorial losses. Our remaining forces are unreliable." "Explain." The Kronar shock troops requested permission to surrender to human forces rather than continue fighting. The Voltarian Engineering Corps has stopped reporting for duty. Even among our core Keltharian units, there are whispers of desertion. Zara watched her father process this information. The emperor who had once commanded the fear and respect of an entire galactic arm was now struggling to maintain control over his own military. And the humans? He asked quietly. They continue their advance, but Zara hesitated, unsure how to explain what she had observed. Father, they're not advancing like conquerors. Every system they liberate, they immediately turn over to local governance. They're not building an empire to replace ours. They're actually keeping their promises of freedom. Chief Intelligence Officer Karmoth, one of the few original advisors still present, looked up from his communication device. Your Majesty, we're receiving a transmission. It's from Colonel Chun. The same human who had walked into their throne room 3 months ago appeared on the main display. He looked exactly as he had that first day, calm, composed, and utterly confident. Behind him, Zara could see the bridge of a human vessel, bustling with activity but notably quiet and efficient. Your Imperial Majesty, the colonel said with what might have been genuine respect. I hope this message finds you well. I'm transmitting from the liberated Nexus system, formerly one of your major fleet bases. The casual mention of losing such a strategic location struck the throne room like a physical blow. I wanted to personally inform you that human forces have surrounded your core systems. We now control all major hyperspace routes leading to Keltharian space. However, I'm not contacting you to discuss surrender terms. Zara felt her breath catch. If not surrender, then what? Instead, I'm here to offer you something my superiors believe you've earned, the truth. Colonel Chin's image seemed to look directly at Emperor Maltos. Your Majesty, you were never our primary target. The Keltharian Empire was simply the most visible symbol of the galactic order we sought to change. You built a civilization based on the subjugation of others, but you also created something remarkable, a galaxy-wide communication network, standardized technology, and peaceful trade between thousands of species. The human paused, allowing his words to sink in. The problem was never Keltharian innovation or Keltharian achievements. The problem was Keltharian dominance. You took credit for the accomplishments of every species you conquered and claimed their innovations as your own. General Vextar snarled. Our empire brought order to chaos. We civilized primitive worlds. As if he could hear the interruption, Colonel Chun continued. I know what you're thinking. That your empire brought peace and prosperity to species that couldn't achieve it themselves. And in some cases, that's even true. But peace imposed through fear is not real peace. Prosperity built on subjugation is not real prosperity. The display changed, showing images of the liberated systems. To Zara-Nth's amazement, they weren't scenes of chaos and destruction. Instead, she saw thriving worlds where multiple species worked together as equals, building new technologies and exploring innovative solutions to galactic challenges. This is what we're offering, Your Majesty. Not the destruction of Keltharian civilization, but the transformation of galactic civilization. A galaxy where strength is measured not by how many worlds you control, but by how many peoples choose to work with you. Emperor Maltos leaned forward, his golden eyes fixed on the human's image. And what of my people? What becomes of the Keltharians in your new galactic order? That's entirely up to you, Colonel Chin replied. We've studied your species extensively, and we found much to admire. Keltharian engineering is remarkable. Your organizational abilities are unprecedented. Your capacity for long-term planning is extraordinary. These are gifts the galaxy needs. The human's expression softened slightly. Your Majesty, we're not asking you to abandon everything you've built. We're asking you to rebuild it on a foundation of cooperation rather than conquest. Zara-Nth found herself leaning forward, fascinated despite herself. What exactly are you proposing? Colonel Chun seemed to look directly at her through the display. Princess Zara-Nth, I presume? We're proposing that the Keltharian Empire voluntarily dissolve itself, and that Keltharian space become a founding member of what we're calling the Galactic Cooperative. You would maintain full autonomy over your core systems while contributing your expertise to joint ventures with other species. And if we refuse, General Vextar demanded, then you'll discover what happens when humans stop playing nice. The colonel replied with frightening casualness. Princess, you've been studying our tactics. Tell your father what you think would happen if we decided to actually conquer rather than liberate. Zaranth felt all eyes in the throne room turn to her. After a long moment, she spoke. Father, they've been showing restraint. All their victories have been achieved while minimizing casualties and preserving infrastructure. If they wanted to destroy us rather than convert us. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood. Colonel Chin nodded approvingly. The princess understands. We could have turned this war into a genocide. Instead, we chose to make it a revolution. But that choice required your cooperation. If you force us to treat you as an enemy rather than a misguided neighbor. The threat hung unspoken but clear. Emperor Maltose was quiet for a long time, staring at the images of cooperative species working together on the display. Finally, he spoke. What guarantees do we have? How do we know this galactic cooperative won't simply become another empire with humans at its head? Because, Colonel Chun said with a smile that reminded Zaranth of their first meeting, humans don't want to rule the galaxy, Your Majesty. We just want to make sure nobody else does either. He gestured to something off-camera, and the display changed to show a document. These are the proposed articles of the Galactic Cooperative. No single species can control more than 15% of the Governing Council. All major decisions require consensus from at least 60% of member civilizations. And, most importantly, any member can withdraw from the cooperative at any time with no penalties. You're offering us equality, Zaranth said wonderingly. We're offering everyone equality, the colonel corrected. The question is whether you'll accept it voluntarily or we'll have to impose it by force. Emperor Maltose stood slowly, his towering frame still impressive despite everything that had happened. Colonel Chun, your terms are acceptable, but I have one condition of my own. Name it. I want to meet with you in person, face to face, as equals, to discuss the transition of power. For the first time since she had known him, Zaranth saw Colonel Chun look genuinely surprised. After a moment, he nodded. Very well, Your Majesty. I'll be honored to negotiate with you as an equal. As the transmission ended, Zaranth realized that she was witnessing the end of one galactic age and the beginning of another. The Age of Empires was ending. The Age of Cooperation was about to begin. And, despite everything she had been taught, despite everything she had believed about Keltharian superiority, she found herself looking forward to it. The humans hadn't just won a war. They had won her heart. In the silence that followed, Emperor Maltose turned to his daughter. Princess, you will accompany me to these negotiations. It seems the future belongs to your generation, and you understand these humans better than any of us. Zaranth bowed deeply, her mind already racing with possibilities. The galaxy was about to change forever, and somehow, impossibly, she was going to be part of shaping that change. The Age of Empire was dead. Long live the Age of Cooperation. Princess Zaranth of the Keltharian Empire stood frozen at the entrance of her father's throne room, her crystalline blue skin shimmering with nervous energy. The massive doors, carved from living starwood and embedded with precious metals from a dozen conquered worlds, had just sealed behind her with a resonating thud that seemed to echo through her very bones. She had been summoned urgently from her studies in the Royal Academy. The message had been brief, but alarming. Your presence is required immediately in the throne room. The fate of our empire may depend on what transpires in the next hour. Her father, Emperor Maltose, was not given to dramatic statements without cause. The throne room stretched before her like a cathedral of power. Soaring pillars of black marble reached toward a vaulted ceiling painted with the history of Keltharian conquests. Holographic displays showed the current extent of their empire spanning 3 galactic arms, with over 2,000 subjugated species paying tribute to the Keltharian crown. It was a reminder of their absolute dominance over this sector of space. But today, something was different. At the center of the vast hall, her father sat upon the throne of stars, a massive seat crafted from the compressed cores of dead planets. His imposing figure, nearly 9 feet tall, with the characteristic ridged skull and powerful build of their species, seemed diminished somehow. Around him stood his most trusted advisors, General Vextar, the grizzled veteran of 100 campaigns, High Diplomat Silnara, whose silver tongue had negotiated the surrender of entire star systems, and Chief Intelligence Officer Karmoth, whose network of spies reached into every corner of known space. Their faces bore expressions she had never seen before. Fear, uncertainty. Even her father's usually commanding presence seemed strained, his golden eyes darting between his advisors and the small figure standing before the throne. The human. Zarinth had heard whispers about humans in the Academy. They were a recently discovered species from a backwater planet called Earth, notable only for their surprising resilience and stubborn refusal to submit to superior civilizations. Most galactic powers considered them a minor curiosity, too primitive to pose any real threat. The Keltharian Empire had planned to add them to their collection of tributary species as an afterthought, once more pressing matters were resolved. This human, however, defied every expectation she had formed. The being stood barely 6 feet tall, minuscule compared to the towering Keltharians surrounding him. His skin was a warm brown color, darker than the pale blues and greens common among civilized species. Short black hair crowned his head, and his face bore the weathered marks of someone who had seen extensive combat. He wore simple dark clothing with armored panels that looked almost primitive compared to Keltharian battlesuits. Yet despite his small stature and crude equipment, there was something about him that made the hair on Zarintha's arms stand on end. He stood with perfect stillness, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on her father with an intensity that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. There was no deference in his posture, no acknowledgement of the overwhelming display of power surrounding him. "Ah, Princess," her father's voice boomed across the hall, though she detected a slight tremor in it. "Allow me to introduce Colonel Marcus Chun of the Terran Defense Force." The human's gaze shifted to her, and Zarinth felt her breath catch. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and in them she saw something that chilled her to the core. Not anger, not hatred, but a cold, calculating intelligence combined with absolute conviction. This was someone who had looked death in the face countless times and never blinked. "Colonel Chun has come to deliver a message," the Emperor continued, his words carefully measured. "The humans have declined our generous offer of incorporation into the Empire." General Vextar stepped forward, his scarred face twisted with disgust. "This primitive refuses to bow before the might of the Keltharian Empire. He stands there as if he were our equal." The human's expression didn't change, but when he spoke, his voice carried across the vast hall with surprising clarity. "I stand here as the representative of free humanity. We have examined your generous offer and found it lacking." "Lacking?" High Diplomat Silnara's voice rose in pitch. "We offer your species protection, prosperity, and a place in the greatest empire this galaxy has ever known." "You offer slavery with better food," the human replied calmly. "We've seen what happens to species that accept your protection. Their children grow up speaking Keltharian instead of their native tongues. Their cultures become footnotes in your museums. Their warriors become your cannon fodder." Zarinth watched in fascination as her father's advisors bristled at the human's words. She had never seen anyone speak so boldly in the presence of the Emperor. Even allied species showed proper deference when addressing the throne. This human spoke as if he were negotiating between equals. "You forget yourself," her father said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had cowed entire worlds. "The Keltharian Empire spans 3 galactic arms. We command fleets that could turn your entire solar system to ash. What makes you think your primitive species can stand against us?" For the first time since entering the throne room, the human smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Because, Your Imperial Majesty," he said, "you've never fought humans before."